I want to deal perhaps with in greater depth on a topic that is not completely new to our discussions from various angles, but I felt that it would be beneficial if we dealt with it a little bit greater depth, particularly the fact that we are, as I mentioned last time, we are in the month of Elul, and we're preparing for Tishrei, and it would serve us well to go into Tishrei with a full heart and an open mind, without any doubts, to be fully in it. The general issue that I want to elaborate on again, as I said, although we have discussed this issue from various angles before, is the definition of the word Emunah. Emunah, which means faith. The first step, first opening door that I want to kind of clarify, because that faith, Emunah, is very often misinterpreted. And it is misinterpreted in a way where it, to a very great extent, loses its value and loses its meaning. And the misinterpretation is presented as faith means you believe what you want to believe. The reason I'm touching on this kind of subjects with you guys who are sitting here in Yeshiva and learning is that we are sitting in Yeshiva and learning, and we certainly want to have a pure and clear view of Yiddishkeit and a pure relationship to it. But if there was ever any kind of exposure, any kind of seed of doubt that may be planted in our minds, we cannot get rid of it unless we really deal with it. Unless we deal with it. If you have something stuck in your teeth, you have to pick it out and throw it out. You can't leave it in there. And faith is the basis, not just the basis of Yiddishkeit, but in fact, as we will discuss, faith is the basic strength with which we face the world, with which we face every day. The reason that there is such a low level, such a total misunderstanding of Emunah, of faith, as saying you believe just what you want to believe. This is just what's called wishful thinking. This is not something that is real, that you've come to realize on a real level. The reason that such an idea is possible is the fact that faith applies to something that you've never seen, And moreover, you do not really have a, a, um, a level of proof comparable to prove to what you have on a physical level. In other words, the conviction that results from faith is something which is internal to the person. And this is something that you have it and you cannot convince others of it. And because of that, it says, there is nothing really real, really true about it. It is just something that you want it. You like it that way. If you like it that way, so it's good enough for you. We have discussed in the past, and I hope in Mitzvah Hashem now there's going to be soon a computer set up. You'll be able to refer back to past classes that we've had. We've discussed seichel. What is the meaning of the word seichel? Seichel, the mind, as used in Chassidus. And basically, what we explained was that seichel is not a means of figuring things in a logical form, just figuring things out. Seichel is a level of perception, which is a unique gift to the human being. An animal, no matter how sly it may be, never has anything to do with seichel, because its values and its perception of things is based on the physical rather than what its seichel tells it. Only a human being has that capacity to define the world for himself the way his seichel perceives it. What we need to understand, and it's imperative that we understand this, we all recognize that there are many things in the world. Trees, animals, whatnot. And they're human beings. Trees have their nature, and nobody questions the nature of trees. There's, that's the way they operate, and the capacity for growth. Trees are what's called in the plant world, in the world of tzomeach that grows. The capacity for growth is a natural capacity. Nobody questions it. Nobody says, it's a mistake that it grows. It should be a stone. No, he says there's a stone, there's a tree. There are animals. Animals have all kinds of varied natures. Nobody questions the nature of animals. This animal, it's acting unnatural. That's not the way it's false to itself. Nobody would ever say that. Every animal has its nature. And it acts according to what is natural to it. And if there is an animal with that nature, that means that nature is definitely possible, and it's a true animal level nature. The only one that is always questioned and not trusted is the human soul. The human being that has the capacity to perceive the world at a much, much higher and much more meaningful and truer level than any other creature in the world. And his capacity and this perception is always questioned. Is it real? Is it true? How do you know? How does the animal Havdil know to behave the way an animal behaves? Not to say that the human being has the human perception in the same way as an animal. An animal is natural. A human being has intellect. But the intellect is a real, true quality. It's not an accident. I don't know whether you're familiar with, to what extent you're familiar with this, but just to expose the fallacy of it, the folly, I might say the dishonesty that's involved. There were, I don't know if there still are, but there are ideas in the secular world, those who evolutionists in the evolutionist philosophy or theory, who say the world was going at natural evolution until it hits the human being. The human being is a mistake. It's a quirk of nature. Because the human being doesn't fit neatly into a natural structure of the world, the human being stands apart, and therefore say, "Oh, it's a mistake." And without realizing, besides the self-contradictory ideas, what I don't want to go into their ideas, but the chutzpah in your face to say the highest and the real presence in the world, that which gives the world a reality, that's a mistake. How does it come to it? Because in fact we are not capable to understand. Understand means logically. We cannot put the human being into a framework.
What?
A framework.
Okay.
We can put him into a natural framework. The human soul, as a matter of fact, is outside, is above nature. This is why what Chassidus says that the human being in general, and particularly at a much higher level, the Yid, has the capacity for Bechira. Bechira means choice, free choice. Free choice means that he is not bound by any natural constraints. He lives in this world, and he's not bound by any constraints. He does and lives according to his perception. He interprets the world according to the interpretation that he gives it. The world doesn't give him his interpretation. He interprets the world. He says what the world is. As I mentioned before, this thing in to some degree we touched upon before. Now, we know that a human being is the only entity in the world that has an internal struggle.
Internal what?
Struggle. That has a fight within himself. What is this struggle about? So the Alter Rebbe explains it very directly. He says that there are two nefoshes. There are actually two souls within the human being. And so without going into defining the terminology, but for our purposes, to speak in simple human terms, this means that a human being actually perceives the world in two very different ways. On the one hand, he sees a perfectly natural world. Perfectly natural world. And in his seeing that the natural world, he sees it even more natural than Lahavra the animal. Because the human being is smart. And he can actually explain the various phenomena and various occurrences in the world. Because he understands the logic behind the natural process. And then on the other hand, he also perceives the world from a totally different standpoint. Before I go to that standpoint, I just want to explain certain concepts. Generally speaking, nature, when we say something is natural, it means the following. Natural means that which happens does not have any particular reason why it happens. Does not have any particular point, message. It happened naturally. Naturally means there was some kind of a cause and effect, and therefore it happened. There is no meaning to it. And this is the natural world. Like we said many times, we discussed day and night. Say day, what is day? For however it happens, whether the earth tilts or the sun moves, makes no difference. The point is the sun comes here, and therefore we have day. We have light. We call it day. The sun moves away. We have darkness, and we call it night. There's nothing particularly significant about it. It's just a natural phenomenon. The same thing when it comes to the monthly cycle. The moon appears and disappears, and there's a whole cycle. There's nothing significant. Astronomers can explain to you exactly what happens, and because of the type of cycle of movement that the moon maintains, why you can see it sometimes you can't see it, or sometimes it gives off light, sometimes it doesn't give off light. This is a perception of the world from a natural standpoint. In the world of science, in the world where nature rules, the greatest victory, triumph, is when you are able to explain away some mystery. Something we didn't understand, we thought it has some kind of significance. No, it doesn't have any significance. Such and such happened. This is the natural world. And the human being has a full perception of the natural world. And we have come to a point today where the natural world, where the human being knows so much about the natural world, that in effect, in terms of the natural world, nothing is left to mystery. There was a time, some few hundred years ago, where the people were not sure, is the earth round or the earth is flat? And if the earth is round, how is it that the earth is round? I mean, what does it stand on? And if the earth is flat, what happens at the end of the earth? You fall over. Mystery. And all kinds of ideas being presented on this question alone. Over the years, now there is no question. I just want to mention to you, by the way, that in the Zohar it says that the earth is round. So we didn't need Columbus to prove it to us. Now there is all mystery, so to speak, in the natural world is removed. And if a person is so inclined, a person loses sight of who he is, it is possible for him to fall to the point where he will actually view the world entirely as natural. Not to say that he will lose the other perception, but he can ignore the other perception, which we'll talk about. Where does the conflict come? Because a human being also sees the world entirely differently. Total opposite of the natural perception. What is the opposite of natural perception? The opposite of natural perception is that not only are things not just the result of some kind of just the result of some natural accident, but there was intent for it. But as a matter of fact, the very natural observation that we see, like we discussed the other time, the natural observation that we see itself also has a message. There's a reason why there is dark and light. A human being sees that there is a reason why there is darkness and light. The world has certain times. There is day and night. And day is a different time and night is a different time. And this capacity, this perception, is equally strong in the person. As a matter of fact, it is stronger because this is where the human being finds himself. This is the way I, as a human being, see it. Yes, externally, logically, you can argue all kinds of things, or it's unnatural. But I see a different thing. I see that there is meaning and truth to it. The question is, where is that perception come from? Is this a perception, as we said, as was suggested, as some people suggest that, or you perceive it the way you want to perceive it, or is there something true in the human being that allows him to see it that way? In other words, is a perception higher than the world, a perception of the meaning of life, the union of Emunah, is that a real force within the person? Or is this something that is part of his imagination?
Sorry, a perception higher than what?
Than the world, than the natural world. This is an ongoing struggle. This is an ongoing struggle inside the person. Before I go to discuss that force, that perception itself, the koyach, what the Alter Rebbe explains, the nefesh or the keys, I want to first demonstrate from experience what type of force this is, how real it is, how indestructible and erasable it is. And then we'll go in and try to understand, where does it come from, what does it mean? Again, this is something which I've mentioned in the past, that particularly in our day, the truth is that throughout history we can observe this type of phenomenon, but in our day, after having seen, going through what we went through in the past century under communism where every aspect of faith was subverted, was not only disallowed but was persecuted. And the communists were really of the conviction that if you train a child not to believe, he won't believe. He won't have that capacity for faith. It's all a made-up story. 3 generations later, of children who grew up without any training in faith, the minute they were given the chance, the minute the freedom was reached them, they immediately gobbled it up. They jumped at it. They said, oh, this is what I was looking for all my life, without ever being exposed to it. So we know that this is not a fictitious, this is not an imaginary thing. This is something very real. It's a real perception in the human being. The similar thing happened in this very our own blessed country. In this land, as we mentioned once before, there was a time where it was believed that the youth, the young people, don't want to know about faith, about religion. They want to know, they're interested in the world. They're interested in making money, becoming business people, becoming professionals. They're not interested in faith. And as a result, they were not given education. And here also, under different circumstances, we lost a generation, sometimes 2 generations, to this false philosophy. We meet people today, Baalei Tshuva, whose grandparents know nothing about Yiddishkeit, not their parents. Grandparents know nothing. Were completely deprived of any knowledge. and sometimes even further down. And yet, with all the blessing that we have here, without any coercion, without any um, external difficulties that force them to it, they were looking for it. This all points out clearly that there is a real quality in the human being. This is what a human being is. And to question that is no different than to question lahavdil, the nature of a lion, the nature of a horse. This is what a human being. This is a godly creation, a miraculous creation, a quirk of nature. And it doesn't fit into the natural mold. But it's very, very real. And it is important. I'll discuss the force itself, but I just want to conclude the thought. It is important that we relate to it proudly. We relate to it forthrightly with full strength, never to doubt ourselves. Because why should we consider us a doubt? Why should we consider ourselves less true, less real than lahavdil, a horse who considers itself true? We have a soul, we are more true. We have meaning in life. The whole world was created for us. We give definition to the world. I mentioned to you one time an experience that I had. It always strikes me when I think of it. Experience that I had visiting a Museum of Natural History. Remember I told you the story? It's worth repeating for those who weren't there. We visited with the family, Museum of Natural History. And we went from one display to the other, and invariably in all displays it shows some kind of a piece of a natural scene. What's a natural scene? One animal devouring another, something, this one is hitting this one, and the ugliest things under the sun. And almost invariably in every one of these displays, there was a little caption on the side that these animals lived in peace, quote unquote. They lived in their natural habitat up until that the humans came. The humans, they disrupted the natural flow of things. And you go through the entire, as you go from window to window, the impression that you get is that the message that is being conveyed here is that the worst thing that ever happened to this world is that a human being came. This is kind of a disaster. Look at all these naturally vicious animals, and the human being comes and eradicates all of that beauty. And the thing that strikes beyond anything else is, besides the stupidity, but it just strikes anything else, is what in fact is the meaning of the world if not for the human being? Who needs a world? What does it mean, a world without human beings? A world without human beings has no meaning. The human being is the one who goes above the world and says, oh, this is what it means. There is meaning to it. There is day and night. There is good and bad. There is right and wrong. There's a purpose. Without the human being, what's going on? Nothing. And this human being who contributes all of that, who defines world, he is the only one that's being doubted, that's being questioned. Is it real? Which points up the grievous error in this. Huh? The severe error. What is, just want to discuss briefly, this special quality in the human being. We're saying that there is a neshama. A neshama, a soul. The human being has a soul, independent of the world. He can stand out, so to speak, and he gives interpretation to the world. What is it? Briefly, we know that in the creation of the human being, again, this was discussed one before. I want to go a little deeper, perhaps. That the human being was created in a different order than everything else in the world, than even the animals. The animals, the trees clearly just grew out of the ground. Hashem says there should be the plant life, and there was a plant life. The animals even. You would think that in an animal there are two things. There is the body and there is the soul. There's a life force. And they're of two different sources, two different qualities completely. And yet the Torah says, not so. The animal was created life force, soul and body at the same time. Even though, in fact, the body is physical and the soul of the animal is spiritual, but it is spiritual within the context, within a worldly context. Sometimes we'll distinguish that, but suffice it for this.
Animals have souls?
Animals have souls. I mean, they have, yes, they're life. Not souls in the same sense as the human being, as we'll see in a minute. It's a spiritual force. The human being was created in a totally different manner. His body was formed first. And then a soul was imbued, was blown, as an expression in the Torah, into this human being. What's the significance of this? And what does it in fact mean? What kind of soul is this? What does this mean? Everything has a source. Like, for instance, a tree grows rooted to the ground and it derives its nourishment from the ground, and that's why it's rooted to the ground. If you uproot it, it loses its source of nourishment. That's why the tree embraces the ground, and it's constantly seeking to dig deeper and deeper to be better rooted and better founded into the ground, because that's its source. Everything in the world, all things in the world are rooted in the physical world, in the ground. And they perceive their existence, they perceive their source of nourishment and their source of being, their, if I can express it, their right to be. What gives them a place for being? It's the earth. Because that's where they create from, and this is where they derive their nourishment from. A human being, as we mentioned, was created differently, in different order, signifying an entirely different relationship. A human being was created, his body was created from the earth, but his soul was put into him as separately. What does that mean? It means that while the body is actually rooted in the earth, his soul is rooted in a different source, elsewhere, from God. Which simply means, and this illustrates in our experience, that a human being, even though he also perceives the reality of the physical world, but he's not bound up by it. He sees it, and yet he hovers above it. You know what hovering means? He doesn't become drawn to it. He can stand off. He can understand and analyze it. Because as a matter of fact, his soul is higher than the world. And this is why the human being actually interprets the world, gives the world a meaning. Instead of the world telling him what he is, he comes and tells the world what the world is. Because he brings to it an entirely different view, an entirely different perception. We mentioned, when we discussed this in the past, that there is a very interesting phenomenon. It's just in the very structure, how the human being gets around, in comparison how the animal gets around. Naturally, something to stand, it needs support on all sides, like a table stands on 4 legs. That's a natural stand. An animal stands in a way that you can see how it actually stands. There's a natural explanation of how it stands. It's balances on all sides. A human being stands on 2. And he is held up straight erect. It's not a natural form. Because natural meaning something that fits into the mold, into the natural mold, naturally to stand, you have to stand on all 4s to be supported by the earth. How is it that a human being is not afraid to stand up erect? If he felt that he is supported by the earth, he would tend to look for some kind of an assist, something to lean on, because he's just standing in thin air. And the answer is because in fact the human being, he's touching the earth with his feet, but what makes him stand is not his feet at all. What makes him stand is his soul, his neshama, his mind. He's actually held up erect. It's the spirit in the human being that makes him stand straight. It's not his feet at all. His feet is just to make sure that he doesn't fly off in the air, so he should be connected to this world. But in fact, he is independent of the world. This all points to the all-important quality that we all have to recognize. While we have the logical capacity, we have our intellect, and we can understand things logically, We have all kinds of levels of understanding and perceptions. What is the ultimate sense? What is the essence? What is the power that the human being represents? The power that is represented by the human being is completely unbounded by world phenomena, by nature.
Completely what?
Excuse me?
Completely what?
Unbounded, unlimited,
Okay, thank you.
not defined by the world. This is what, generally speaking, is called Emunah.
It's called what?
Emunah, faith. A perception that we have, and it is part of our soul. This is a reality. This is not chas v'sholom or any kind of imaginary thing. It's really real. It's stronger than anything in the world. It's more true than anything in the world. Where we actually recognize that there is a truth that is not explainable by a natural means. So no matter what natural questions you have, what natural views you have of this human, this is all below the human being. This is all fine on the animal level. A human being has a recognition of a truth that goes completely beyond it. And once this recognition is touched upon, once one comes in touch with that, then all of a sudden, everything that the whole world, the whole natural world, assumes a totally different definition. All things that appear to be perfectly natural, now all of a sudden have different meanings. Like we are coming now to Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. In a natural world, what's the beginning of the year? There's no beginning, there's no end. It's a continuous cycle. But the human being says no, it's not a continuous cycle. The world lives because there is a meaning to its life. And in terms of a meaning, a new cycle begins a new world. And as you learn the Hasidus, it explains things in a very deep and a deep way, the Sinyan. But even simply, it says Rosh Hashanah, it's the head of the year. There is a beginning and there's an end, and there's a middle. We have, as the Torah defines it, we have a 7-day cycle. That's called a week. Again, in the natural world, this is all meaningless. It's just a cycle. One day drives the other. But a human being comes and says, no, that's not so. In other words, every simplest thing in the natural world, bringing the light of the human soul, acquires an entirely different definition. Why? Because the human being, the Yid, brings to the world meaning. And once you bring to it meaning, you say that meaning applies not just to the whole world, not just to the year, not just to the month, not just to the year, to the week, not even just to the day, even to the hour, even to the minute. Everything has meaning. The biggest and the smallest. This is illustrated. Would be a means to illustrate the point. Would be that if you walked into this room and you only saw one little corner, one thing standing there, you would say that this thing is just there without any purpose. But then as you examine further and further, and you see that this is whatever, a shul, a learning room, and there are books all over, there's forum, there are tables, there's chairs, then every small thing acquires a different meaning. Oh, this is here because of this is there because of this is here because of this. Everything has a meaning. Why? Because you recognized that there is an overall meaning. If there's an overall meaning, there is a meaning to every specific thing else. And this is where we come in and we say, there is a morning, and the morning has to be occupied and has to be done in such a way. There is a midday, and that has its function. There's an evening, there's a night. Everything has its function. Having this understanding, which is imperative that we reflect on this and understand the power of the human soul that supersedes any other truth that there is in the world. We will be able to then clearly approach the natural world and recognize where is this natural world come to challenge my faith. We're not in the same league at all. The natural world is on an animal level. I'm a human being. We're not in the same league. Of course the natural world doesn't understand who I am, because it doesn't have the capacity to understand it. But I have my mission. I have my mission to define and tell the natural world what it is here for. The animal level has to fit into the natural world. The human being does not. The human being, he is the leader, he defines the natural world. This is what we mentioned the other day. Again, I hope in Mitzvah Hashem that you will have the access and be able to listen to all to our previous lessons to know that when Odom Orishim was created, up until the time that Odom Orishim was created, which means the first 5.5 days of creation, right? There was just a natural world. Everything stood by itself. The fish had their thing, the behemoths had their thing, the plants had their thing. Everything had its own thing. But Odom Orishim was created, which means that there was this soul that is based and rooted in God, rooted in higher than the world, not dependent on the world. So he stood up, and the first thing he came out, the Gemara says, was call all the animals and say, do you know who you are? Do you know what you're here for? He said, we are here to recognize our Creator. And we can just, so to speak, project. This was like coming from left field. Where are you coming from? We don't know. We just know the earth. I live from the earth. The behemoths say, I have no idea. I grew out straight from the earth. The trees say, I grew out straight from the earth. The fish say, I grew out straight from the waters. And Adam said, this is what we want. We have a creator who created the earth itself. So then, regardless of the fact that the animals couldn't understand what Adam Rishon was speaking about, it didn't faze him because he was teaching them. He did not look to the natural world to tell him what the truth is. He told it what the truth is. This is what the Jewish soul is. This is what our function is. If you're looking for, so to speak, to recognize our own truth, it's not found in the natural world. It's found in what our souls are telling us. And the natural world shouldn't faze us a bit. With this, we can carry through and resolve the inner struggle, the inner conflict, and to give it meaning, to put light into the world, to put light into our own natural view of things, to put things in perspective. And then, with Hashem's help, face life wholesomely, without fear, without self-doubt. And fulfill our mission, fulfill the mission of the world and the shlichus that we have from Hashem, to bring Mashiach. This will be it for today. What do I do with this? Hit the same button?